Hello, students, and welcome to week 9. Week nine's topic is on sexuality and intimate relationships. And so we're going to be covering one chapter from each of our textbooks. So we're going to be covering chapter 8, actually, from both of them. So for the Murray, the Sexuality Counseling, Murray, Pope, and Willis, we're going to be covering chapter 8, sexuality and intimate relationships. So the chapter starts off, the intimacy in sex is never only physical. In a sexual relationship, we may discover who we are in ways otherwise unavailable to us. And at the same time, we allow our partner to see and know that individual. As we unveil our bodies, we also disclose our persons. So that's from Thomas More from 1940. It's a really great quote to kind of start us off on this topic. Even though working with any type of client, we may run into sexuality. We've already kind of discussed that. But especially if you're working with couples or within relationships, you're going to have to discuss this topic. It's going to come up, and if it's not, then we need to bring it up as clinicians. And so the first main topic in this chapter is the dynamics of couple relationships. And so romantic attraction, intimacy, all of these little parts of it. Clarifying intimacy, what it is, and helping the couple to understand, what kind of intimacy they want to have and can be exploring and things like that. Also precursors of intimacy, and then how emotional intelligence and differentiation of self is important within relationships. Because in order to communicate with the other person and to really listen to them and attend to each other's needs, we need to work on our emotional intelligence so that we can have a better understanding of the ways that we express our emotions, but also our partners do as well. And then the differentiation of self and how I can be an individual and still be within this relationship. And so we are together, and we also are separate individuals, even when we are together. This topic also gets into communication skills and how couples can kind of work on that, balancing multiple demands, because as we know in relationships, it's not just about the relationships, it's all of the other factors that are around us. Gets into attachment, which we talked about before, I think, in other chapters, but how attachment styles affect our intimate relationships, and what the different attachment styles are, and depending on how they play out, that can have a really big impact in working with the two individuals. So what is each of their attachment styles, and then how do they play off each other. And now this chapter does really focus, or at least this topic really focuses a lot on monogamy, and so relationships between two individuals. And so not to discount the poly or consensual non-monogamous communities, but that's really what this focuses on at this point. There's a great case illustration on page 232 that talks about Cynthia and Dane and how they come into counseling and what they present with. And then it has some questions for you to think about if you were working with this couple. So it would be really great to go through that so that you have some practice with thinking about case conceptualization, working with clients. The next topic that this text gets into is sexual desire between partners, which is an important piece. Are they mismatched, or, what about changing sexual desires as people age, and different things of, with illness and disabilities, or I'm trying to think of other situations. Hormones, there's just lots of different ways that this can also change once a relationship is established. And then the topic of interaction patterns and how the couple interacts with one another outside of that. Also sexual decision making, so who makes the decisions, how are decisions made, especially when there's really opposing beliefs, values, or ideas. How do we then come to an agreement on things? Then finally, the chapter does start getting into the differences between monogamous and non-monogamous relationships and what that looks like, and how that opens another dynamic within relationships overall. Then it gets back into monogamy between two people, integrating sexuality counseling with couples counseling. So how do you integrate that when you're working with two individuals in counseling together? Sexuality counseling for specific relationship concerns. So it talks about infidelity, divorce, dating, and all of that. On chapter 243, and amongst those topics is an ethical discussion about working with a couple and one partner reveals that they had an affair either in the past or currently engaging in an affair. And you know, did you go over informed consent with confidentiality? What do you do with that information? How does it get shared to the other partner? Things like that. And so secret keeping within sessions is a really important topic that needs to be discussed when you're working with more than one individual. And this can be the case too with full families, right? So like what is kept confidential and what's not. And so at the end of the the end of the chapter gets in the summary, the keystones, additional resources, and all of that on this topic. So then we move into our Bueller textbook. It's also chapter 8, so nice and convenient for you guys this week that both are chapter 8. The title of this chapter is Relationships and Sex Therapy. So this gets into a little bit more in depth with sex therapy and relationships, but ties directly into the stuff that we already covered. It talks about factors that contribute to sexual dissatisfaction. And so it breaks it down into like being naive about sex. So what knowledge does the individuals and the couple as a whole come into counseling with? Communicating about sex. So the other book talked about communication sort of in general. This is specifically when it comes to sexuality, contraception, and individuals' values, beliefs, and decisions about that. Chronic negative patterns of interaction. And so if you're having constant difficulties when it comes to sexuality, how do we work on them and challenge them? And maintaining passion in the face of domesticity. So we're kind of settling down, we're maybe married or permanently coupled in some way, start having kids, living our life. How does that change all of those factors? And so it talks about stage 1 of being in love, and then moving into passionate love, and then more compassionate love. And what do those changes kind of look like, and how do we navigate them? Next is when the problem is attachment. So it ties into the attachment stuff that we talked about in the other textbook, differences in desire, differences in sexual taste and style, and unrealistic expectations. So it goes a little bit more in depth into those topics, and then does get back into the discussion of non-monogamy, so a different view of adult relationships. It then has a step into my office, which I love these little case studies, about an individual who is 18 years old and had been sexually active from the age of 10 with a much older person, and they're from another country, so had recently moved, having many encounters since then, and got married at 22 to a highly religious person about 10 years older than them. He had great difficulty staying monogamous within the marriage and found himself wanting to have more sexual and emotional intimacy with other men as well as women. And so how do you explore that? How do you work on that with the other individual, for the individual in counseling? So pretty short chapter. It has some takeaway points at the end. It also has a language of polyamory, so different terms that are really important to know. There's so many more than this. I think it just has a handful in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but these are basics, right? So having a basic working knowledge with these definitions is a good start. And then if you find yourself getting involved in working with individuals involved in the polyamory or consensual non-monogamous relationships, then you would want to learn a little bit more on your own. Has some activities that you can engage in to help yourself to work on some of your biases and your automatic assumptions, and kind of getting more comfortable in this topic. Resources and references at the end. And then there's some great addendums. Talking to each other about sex, great activity you can work on with couples or individuals in relationship with one another. Sex, love, and contraception, so just some information on that. A trip to the sex toy shop, so what would that be like to make that a part of the relationship? And then I like and I don't like. And I'm gonna try and remember to link below the yes, no, maybe chart, so that you have that to potentially use with people in relationship with one another. And that is it. That is it for 8 and 8. So that is your reading that you're going to be, that's going to be included in the quiz. So you want to make sure you read those and look at the study guides for them. Obviously below I'm going to link a bunch of other readings and videos and stuff to get into these topics a little bit more in depth, but they are not required for the quiz. So just so you know to spend most of your time on that, and then those can be additional resources. So for this week, we also have 2 assignments. We have the podcast discussion, which talks about difficulties within relationships. And there are 2 of them that you can choose to listen to. You can listen to one and reflect on it. You can listen to both and talk about differences and similarities you saw between the 2. And then we have our quiz 3 this week. So all of your study guides and everything will be posted so that you can start preparing for that. That will be open from the beginning of the week. So it'll be open from Monday, which is probably when you're listening to this video, throughout the week, so that you have plenty of time to complete that quiz whenever you'd like. And so that is on weeks 7, 8, and 9 of the course will be covered this week in the quiz. So any questions or anything else that you have going on or want to ask about or talk about, definitely message me. But otherwise, have a great week looking a little bit further into this topic. Hopefully it ties together nicely with your intro to marriage and family and couples counseling, if you've had that, or if you are an MFT student. And I look forward to talking with you next week, week 10, in our live Zoom meeting. Thanks.